Welcome to this embroidery tutorial on how to prepare your needle and thread ready for sewing. First things first, let's quickly chat supplies. You will need some embroidery thread, a pair of embroidery scissors, and of course some needles. There are lots of different types and sizes of needles that you can use, but honestly I only tend to use 3 to 4 different ones just depending on the type of work that I'm doing. And I like to store them and organize them in these cute little needle books. Most embroidery thread will come in a skein like this one, and always pull the loose end of the thread from the bottom of the skein near where the color code is. When you are starting out, I recommend only cutting a length that's about 30 to 40 centimeters or approximately the length of your forearm. It is a lot easier to manage a shorter length of thread, and it can minimize knotting, which can be really frustrating. This is a 6-stranded cotton from DMC, and it is the most common style of thread. You can split these strands and use any number of them depending on your project, and I have a separate video on how to do this. To start with, we are going to tie a knot in one end of our thread. There are a number of different knots and techniques to do with this, but I simply just tie a knot in one end and trim off any of the excess thread. This simple knot works really well if you're using 3 to 6 strands, but if you're going to be using 1 to 2 strands, I would recommend using a quilter's knot, which you will see later in this video. Now on the opposite end, we are going to thread our needle. You can see here that the strands are all fanned out from each other and the ends are a bit fuzzy and frayed. So I recommend wetting one end of the thread, and as gross as it is, I just pop it in my mouth to get some saliva on it and then flatten it between my fingers. This helps the strands stick together and keeps them together as you thread your needle. The other thing that I like to do is trim off any of those frayed ends so that they're all neat and straight. You can see how flat and tight all of these strands are, making this whole process a lot easier. So I like to hold my needle in my right hand and the thread in my left, and then slowly guide the eye of the needle over the thread, which I'm actually holding really tightly at the end in my left hand. The more you practice threading your needle, the easier it gets. Pull your needle approximately 1/3 of the way along the needle, fold it over, and then you are ready for sewing. For all 6 strands, I was using a size 24 tapestry needle because it has a much bigger eye, but if you're going to use a single strand, you can use a smaller needle like this size 6 embroidery needle, which has a much smaller and finer eye. The technique is exactly the same, and if you have a lot of issues threading your needle, check that you are using the right size needle. To create a quilter's knot, line your needle up with the end of the thread. Hold the needle and the thread end together and wrap the length of the thread around the needle 4 to 5 times. Then pinch the wrapped thread in place and gently pull the needle through the wrapped thread to make a knot. Just trim off the ends and then you are ready to sew. If you have lots of trouble threading your needle, then I recommend that you grab a needle threader. There are lots of different types and styles, but they will all commonly look a bit like this. To use one, grab your needle and then thread the wire loop of the needle threader through the eye of the needle. Then holding that in place with one hand, you are going to then feed your thread through that wire loop, which is much larger than the eye of the needle, so it makes it a lot easier to see. Then holding onto the needle threader securely, gently pull that wire loop and the thread back through the eye of the needle. Make sure you go slowly and carefully so that you don't pull that wire loop from the threader. Bring your needle about 1/3 of the way across your thread and then you are ready to sew. My top tip from using a needle threader would be to size up your needle so that there is enough space to pull the doubled over thread and the needle threader back through the eye. So for the 3 strands, I used a size 24 tapestry needle, but for the 6 strands, I ended up using a size 22 tapestry needle just to make sure that everything fitted through nice and easy.